Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. It is Friday afternoon and we are joined by our very special guest, Ben Jacobs. It's the B&B show, transfer expert, amazing journalist. Ben, welcome. A day later than we would have liked because Ruben Amorim did his press conference yesterday, but we're glad we've got you to provide all of our Manchester United updates.
Great to be back. Happy Halloween to everyone. Are we in a position where we can say Manchester United are scary good at the moment?
Oh, I love it, Ben. I love it. We are scaring everyone with the fact we've only got one game a week and we actually look good. Brian Mbeumo. It's bad, that, isn't it?
That is also the correct pronunciation, though.
I know. Just one player of the month for Manchester United as well, and could win it for the Premier League. So that'd be good.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing about Manchester United at the moment is that this purple patch might get the guy his haircut, might get them into Champions League football, might narrow the gap on the leaders Arsenal. There's a lot to like, even with the bad Mbeumo pun.
Yeah, there is a lot to like, and there's a lot to also improve. I mean, I want to get straight into it, Ben. I mean, Jason Wilcox spoke quite positively recently about the recruitment, did an interview with MUTV, and seemed to be really strong on the fact that he wants to bring in more players of the likes of Mbeumo, Cunha, and then also them prospect players like Senny Lamans and Benjamin Sesko that look like really good prospects for the future, and was honest about the fact we still need to improve and we wanting to improve. Do you think that United will attempt to strengthen in January, especially with that AFCON coming up? You know, some of our really important players could be playing in that competition. Do you think they will go into that January transfer window looking to strengthen the same way that they did with Dorgu last year? Oh, this year, but last season.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be opportunistic. And obviously, if the right midfielder was to materialise, they can add one in January and one in the summer. If not, I think it will be two at the end of the season. Kobbie Mainoo's future will in part impact that. Same can be said for Josh Zirkzee, valued as a squad player. We'll speak about him, no doubt, over the course of the next hour. But if he departs, there's room to add a striker in January. Again, if the right target presents itself. And fullback is still there too. Many people, I think, were looking at Manchester United after the window and focusing on what they still needed. And some were saying that Senny Lamans comes in, but maybe a more experienced goalkeeper. And you may remember on previous shows, I've said the opposite, that Senny Lamans was going to get a run in the side after acclimatising with the chance to show what he can do. And I think everyone at Manchester United at the moment has that ability to change the recruitment plans in January. Of course, if you're going well, maybe one or two make the difference between getting Champions League or not. But if the side are gelling, then there's also a logic you don't need to make that many changes because the group is suddenly and finally living up to their potential. If the opposite happens and they hit a lull over the busy festive period or some injuries are picked up, then of course they'll be busier than maybe they first expected in January. So we're actually at a stage of the season now where the recruitment team probably don't know whether to stick or twist because it will depend on form, it will depend on continuity, it will depend on some young players holding down spots. It may depend, like I said before, on Mainoo or Zirkzee, and then where they are in the table as well. Because one thing's really clear, that despite the start to the season and a lot of narrative over Ruben Amorim's future, I come back to something that I've reported, which is Jim Ratcliffe looks at this squad now, not with January additions, not with summer additions, not with 3 to 5 years more of this project, but right now. And he thinks this team are good enough to qualify for Champions League football. So although we're sort of half joking about Man United being scary good and the mood is more positive, I think table-wise, they're exactly where Ratcliffe thinks they should be. But defensively in particular, there's room for improvement. So that's where your holding midfielder or your back line come into conversation, because Manchester United's goals output is the same as Arsenal, but goals conceded, I think it's 14 versus 3 from the league leaders. And if they can just tighten up a little bit, then they could potentially go even further up the table.
It's exciting times, and hopefully that we do attack that January window in a way to supplement the squad if we are on the brink of that Champions League football, which I feel like we really could be if we continue the way that we are. Then I think it just makes sense to help bolster the squad in areas that, like you say, that probably do need it a little bit, that defensive area, especially the midfield. I mean, just speaking about the midfield, Ben, I know it's not necessarily one for January, but Angelo Stiller's name keeps coming up. I mean, is he still considered a top option? I think there was a report suggesting that the interest came specifically from the Wilcox and Favell side, really liking that player. Is he creeping up towards the top of that midfield list?
Yeah, Chris Favell in particular really likes Angelo Stiller, as I reported in the summer window, a name that Manchester United have been monitoring for quite some time, but they never moved because there was never a realistic possibility of getting him to leave last summer. January is going to be difficult as well. And then obviously with next summer, a lot will actually depend on whether that release clause still exists or whether the buyout is taken, because there is an ability to cancel the release clause if Stuttgart are prepared to pay a fee in the region of 2 million euros or about 1.5 million pounds. And that's a club option. So there's nothing really the player can do to stop that. But of course, if you get rid of the release clause, it doesn't mean the player's not available next summer. It just means there's a slightly higher asking price. And at the moment, I think all indications are that Manchester United are going to be patient with Stiller, continue to watch him, and then assess it a little bit later, either this year or early next year, knowing that barring anything crazy or unexpected, nothing there is going to be possible mid-season. Whether or not we can call him top of the list remains to be seen for a few points and reasons. The first is that Mainoo, Casemiro, who could end up staying on reduced terms if they're able to get him to agree to that, as opposed to just letting this contract tick down. And remember, there's a club option on that Casemiro deal as well. Manuel Ugarte, who remains liked by Ruben Amorim. So there's midfielders at the club that, in the case of Casemiro, could earn a different kind of deal. I don't even think we can call it improved, because if he's to stay beyond 2026, it's probably like Harry Maguire on reduced terms. You've got Mainoo, who's trying to fight and force his way into this system with both Manchester United and England in mind. And until some of the internal determinations as to what they're going to do with midfielders, in Mainoo's case, who might want to leave again in January, in Casemiro's case, who they'd like to stay, but they want the wage to come down. Once they establish the answers to those internal questions, the external midfielders that they'll go for and at what volume will be more apparent. So I'm led to believe it will be a minimum of 2. So if we're talking about, is there a favourite? Probably not, because there's several targets of which they'd like 2 to arrive. But if another midfielder left Manchester United, it could be 3 midfielders, 2 established first teamers, and then more of a younger kind of profile for the future in that mould, I suppose, of Leon, who is doing really well, is developing, but hasn't yet had those first team opportunities to really show what he can do week in, week out. So it will be a midfield revamp, but I don't think we'll have that much with some of the bigger names that get linked with Manchester United to be excited about in January, because as we've said on previous shows, a lot of the Whartons or Stillers or Balebas are not expected to be available mid-season.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because you could be in a situation for Manchester United next summer where Casemiro could go. We don't know what Bruno's going to do. He said he's not making a decision until after the World Cup, but he could go. Mainoo could be pushing for game time elsewhere. He could go. And then Ugarte, as much as he's well liked by Amorim, hasn't really been trusted to start games, so he might want to go. And then you're in a situation where you can't really have that many midfielders leaving the club all at once, and you'd have to bring in at least 3, if not 4, if that was the case. So, yeah, it could be a massive midfield reshuffle for United. But with the World Cup on as well, it's going to be interesting how that window is attacked. It might benefit Manchester United, giving him a bit of time to assess their options, I suppose. But with Casemiro there, you just touched on him. Do you think he's open to staying at Manchester United on a reduced wage?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that Casemiro might put forwards, if his form warrants it, just trigger the option as well. And Manchester United would have to financially determine if that's in their interest on the field for the extra year at that number, and also off the field as far as PSR is concerned. But you mentioned those other exits, including potentially, of course, Casemiro, because the contract is running down, and the World Cup. And both of these things really benefit Manchester United in some ways, because if Casemiro goes, you get a wage off the books. If the likes of Mainoo or Manuel Ugarte were to leave, you get good money and pure profit in the case of Mainoo. And if Bruno Fernandes departs, yes, there is a release clause in theory, but timing is everything with it. And if it isn't triggered in time, he's on the market at a number that Manchester United will feel would be worthwhile if he departs. So then you've got a lot more funds to really attack the market and bring in a revamp of your midfield, which, as you say, would probably need a minimum of 2, but maybe even more if all of those names were to depart. My gut feeling, speaking to sources as well, is that you won't get that mass exodus. So if they think Bruno's going to go, you're more inclined to extend Casemiro. If Casemiro departs, you're more inclined to fight to keep Bruno. If Mainoo goes, Manuel Ugarte stays. They're not just going to open the door and let 4 walk out, then have a World Cup, then potentially wait and then be panicking in the market. I think some of these names will know they can't depart Manchester United unless an appropriate replacement. And in some cases, you would argue an upgrade is found. And by upgrade, I don't mean anything derogatory to the midfielders at the club. I just mean an upgrade to the project rather than the now. So if you're replacing an older player like Casemiro with somebody younger with huge potential that can give you 5 years and ultimately come in on a lower wage, that would be seen as an upgrade, because over the course of that contract length, that player would have more chance of making an impact compared to maybe keeping somebody like Casemiro on his current wage. So I suppose upgrade is the wrong word. It's more about thinking long-term rather than short-term. Manchester United will be busy though, but they don't have all of the answers to these questions about who's staying, who's going, who wants to leave, who might agitate for a move, and who might play their way into this squad and system between now and the end of the season. So I appreciate when journalists come on, you kind of want, who exactly are we going to sign? When are we going to sign them? Black and white, simple, but you're sort of selling a false dream at this point because Manchester United don't have all of the answers yet. And I think they're quite smart to be patient and wait and see how some of the players still at the football club do, who earns what, who forces their way into the side, because that will inform what they do in the market. And that's better because it tells you that they're not panic buying and they're being far more considered and strategic in the market than maybe in previous windows. And then in relation to the World Cup, don't forget, if it's a slower market, that's good news for Manchester United because they then enter into a new financial year. And that means instead of a load of other clubs that maybe are competing for the same players and signatures, trying to do early business, and maybe Manchester United can't because they don't want to put that money on this financial year. If the market slows and then mad races for your Balebas and your Whartons and so on happen from July onwards, Manchester United financially will be in a much stronger position to move because they'll have entered into the next financial year. Yeah,
I mean, all interesting stuff. In terms of bringing someone in the January, because I know a lot of people are thinking about that, is Conor Gallagher still on the cards?
Yeah, I think so. Gallagher's probably the most likely because he's the most feasible, and anyone else they might have to either overpay for or have the player really agitate for the move. So even though Carlos Baleba hasn't started the season in the same form as last campaign, there's no indication that he's falling into that Evan Ferguson style category where in a heartbeat he goes from £100 million player to somebody loaned or potentially sold. Brighton still feel come the end of the season, Baleba will be settled, will be consistent, and will be worth well in excess of 100 million, but they've not given a price to anybody because that's not how they operate. So mid-season, it will be the same answer as towards the back end of last summer. Adam Wharton is enjoying life at Crystal Palace. We don't know his price or availability until ultimately those talks between Wharton and Palace take place. Is he going to sign a new deal? And like Antoine Semenyo, could there be a release clause in it? But if everything stayed as is, and Palace were not able to get Wharton to sign a new deal, then I come back to my previous reporting, which is I'm told there is kind of a gentleman's agreement that Wharton can leave for a Champions League club for somewhere in the region of £60 million. But I stress again, Champions League club. So not any Premier League club, a club with Champions League football, which is why it's going to be important that Manchester United finish in the top 4 or top 5. If that scenario emerges, we could see the opposite though. And in the next few months, Wharton could sign a new deal at Crystal Palace and he becomes a whole lot harder to get. So with Gallagher, the difference is twofold. First of all, the player wants to leave La Liga and ideally return to the Premier League and do so also to play every week and try and force his way into Thomas Tuchel's plans. And the second point in all of this is Atletico Madrid have never been against a permanent exit, but in the summer, they were not in favour of a loan, even with an option to buy. So Manchester United will hope in January, and I do think they'll be one of Conor Gallagher's suitors, that Atleti soften their position, become open to a loan with an option, or maybe even an obligation to buy. Or from Atleti's point of view, they will feel Manchester United might just find the budget to buy Conor Gallagher permanently, and they may stick to that position. And if Manchester United move, they may realise they can get the player, but they're going to have to put their hand in their back pocket. So a lot will also depend by January. Are Man United on course for European football? And do they feel they can take the risk of forking out something in the region of 40-45 million pounds to get Conor Gallagher? Because if Atleti sell, they also won't want to make a book loss from the price that they paid Chelsea. So there's a few moving parts here, but in essence, Gallagher's available in the January market. Manchester United are interested. Their preference is a loan with an option. Atleti might be open to a loan with an obligation, but they weren't open to any loan over the summer. And once again, if it flips in Atleti's favour, they will sanction a permanent sale, but they basically want a fee in the region of 50 million euros. And we'll have to wait and see whether Manchester United think at that number the player is worthwhile.
Do you think that United are still heavily interested in Carlos Baleba like they were in the summer? Just because I know he has had a bit of a poor start to the season, and after that game against United, I know a lot of United fans are a bit like, oh, I don't actually know if I want to go for him. I know how well he did last season, but do you think United are maybe slightly concerned not only maybe about his form, but also mentality-wise, if you can drop off like that based off, you know, the news maybe getting to you, is that somebody that Manchester United can afford to have that's going to let the outside noise affect them? I mean, I think he was a really, really good player last season. I still think he's got a lot of potential, but do you think United have cooled their interest in him, or are they still right there?
Not cooled their interest, but again, and it's difficult in the late October, early November period to sort of give a fresh update, because Brighton's position is not for sale. We've not given you a price. We don't want to hold any club-to-club talks. So Manchester United have done everything they can on Carlos Baleba. They've sounded out the player side. His head was turned by the move. I don't think they'll be too concerned about his form at the moment. And although for Brighton, it's not ideal, because maybe they've got a player who is still finding some stability. I think he had an injury as well, though, for some of the games in the early part of the season. But they may think, if it continues like this, the price is only going to go down as well. And the upside of not naming a price and being very tough in the market is with the likes of, if we look at Chelsea, Marc Cucurella or Moises Caicedo, Brighton get their money. But the downside is if you don't engage and name a price and then the player's out of form, suddenly the prospective buyer is in a really strong position. And I think you'll see that with Evan Ferguson. If there's buyers for him in January, if his Roma end loans, or in the summer, it'll be nowhere near 100 million. It'll probably be nowhere near 50 million. So then Brighton gamble on saying not for sale, or the player's worth in excess of 100 million, but we're not giving you a specific price. And if you get a 1 or 2 season drop off, somebody might get a little bit of a bargain. So it's a fascinating game, because if Manchester United return, they may lowball Brighton, and we'll see how that works out. Because as I said before, usually Brighton get their price. So at this stage, I wouldn't say they've cooled their interest. I would just say there's absolutely nothing Manchester United can do in terms of their pursuit of Carlos Baleba, except let the player focus on his season, wait, and then come summer, try and finally get a specific ballpark out of Brighton to start a negotiation. And if it's 120 million, they may walk away and say it's better to invest that on 2 midfielders. If the price drops or they see value, I think they'll be back at the table. So he will be one of the Manchester United targets, but it's far too early to be talking about it advancing or even suggesting what the final number might be that Brighton are prepared to sell for.
Yeah, well, let's see how that pursuit goes on. It's interesting as a United fan, because I rated Baleba so highly, and I really wanted us to sign him in the summer, but now I am a bit conflicted because of what's happened, but also if the price is coming down, it kind of gets you in like a little bit of a 50-50 headspace. But Derek has put a super chat here. He has said, "Hi Ben, multiple reports this week of Vivell being very impressed with Ayyoub Bouaddi, Lille 18-year-old midfielder, heavily scouted by United. Any info or truth in that?"
Yeah, it's just normal scouting by Manchester United. They've looked at several young midfielders and in other positions, and it's true they like the player and they've watched him, but nothing is developing. But it comes back to what I said before, that they may add 2 senior midfielders and then a young player, and that gives that young player a bit more time to bed in, and they're not thrown straight in at the deep end. So you would be staggered if you knew how many players Manchester United or any other top club actually scout. It's in the thousands, and shortlists from scouting to monitoring or contact tend to still be in the hundreds. So it's nothing to get excited about just yet, but it does show you this twofold strategy that's taking place, which is buy for the now, proven Premier League experience, and plan for the future. And there's definitely a clear divide in terms of roles and strengths. So actually, since Jason Wilcox has stepped up following the departure of Dan Ashworth, he's more a now person, whereas Chris Vivel's strength is in finding talent, developing relationships with them, and fulfilling a sort of dual role that's more associated with not just a head of recruitment, but a technical director as well. So he's the planner. He's the one that is ideating who they should be going and meeting and speaking to the families of a lot of these young players. And Manchester United are kind of going through a twofold strategy of where they're looking as well. One is trying to find mainland or heartland European players that often see you compete against other clubs in Big Five leagues. And I think the feeling from Chris Vivel, having worked in the Red Bull group, is Manchester United have actually been quite weak at finding young teenage European players that they can put in their under-21s or their academy, and then they can break through. And maybe there was no need, because if you look at like the Manchester United players under Sir Alex Ferguson that famously came through the academy, many of them were British, many of them you didn't have to look that far from home, and they would burst into the first team and have 10 years at the football club. And perhaps that led to a little bit of complacency, but there's definitely more of an onus saying we don't only need to find an emerging region. We can look at, for example, young French or young Spanish players, and we can try and get them a lot earlier, and then they can have time. And then by the time they're 19, 20 and so on, maybe they'll break into the first team. So there's a feeling that Manchester United have underperformed in that area or that metric. And the second area that Vivel is going to be focusing on, which I think is now commonplace with the likes of Chelsea and Liverpool, is South America and Brazil in particular. And I think in the course of maybe the next 3 to 5 windows, you'll see more business from Manchester United from that part of the world as well.
Exciting, because there's so many good young talents on that side of the world, and I mean in Europe as well. But I mean, one you can just point out is Estavo for Chelsea. I mean, absolutely brilliant, and there's so many more young talents coming out from different parts of the world. So it's a good thing to hear. And Vivel's got a great reputation. I know he had a big hand in Sesko. I know he was already developed at that point, but it's still exciting to have somebody like that as part of the team at Manchester United. I mean, MK says, what left wing backs are we looking at? Is Semenyo possible at left wing back? I mean, people keep asking this question. I know left wing back is an area that Ruben Amorim's wanting to strengthen. I mean, is there any news on that, Ben?
Not a massive amount, because they are still quite well stocked there at the moment. I think if they were to add another left wing back, it wouldn't be someone that they would convert into that position like Semenyo. We've mentioned Anthony Robinson before, but their age might be a factor that has some debate, or even potentially some within the recruitment team that have got reservations about signing a profile like that. But remember again, and this is the thing to get your head around, you have a new model that is collaborative and intentionally has freedom to challenge. So if you don't get a meeting where Ruben Amorim wants one name, Chris Vivel puts another name forwards, and Jason Wilcox has a third name, and they disagree, you don't have a functional model. And every time you sort of hear there was a universal move or everyone said yes to a certain player, there was still probably that debate before it and a little bit of friction. So Ruben Amorim put forwards Ollie Watkins, Christopher Vivel put forwards Benjamin Sesko. Eventually they decided on Sesko, better value, long-term, lower wage, seen as a good fit within this system. So they moved away from Ollie Watkins. That doesn't mean Ruben Amorim is disappointed. It just means they had a deep pool of different targets and a healthy debate to get to the one that they decided to go for. And when they make that argument, there will be exceptions to the rule. So the project is about lowering the average age of the squad, but it's also about knowing when you need a bit of Premier League experience or an older player as well. So what happens, for example, if Casemiro departs, Harry Maguire doesn't sign a new deal, do you actually conclude, because of Luke Shaw's situation as well, it is better to get a proven Premier League player in their late 20s because you're losing a lot of experience potentially from the back line? And I come back to what I said before without sounding like a broken record. This is why this period is seen by many in the industry as a bit of limbo, because you want to move. And of course, if you can add quality in January, you will, but you have to wait and be patient. And there's a lot of unanswered questions because we're only a handful of games into the season, and recruitment teams don't want to rush or overcommit to a target, because then you end up overpromising to a player. And if you don't meet up to that promise, you develop a reputation as maybe stringing along too many targets or signing a target, saying you're going to get first team football. And by the time they arrive, maybe your existing first team are holding down those spots. So it's actually quite smart, again, for Manchester United to have a period of inaction, because even though it doesn't seem like they're doing that much or there's that many new names reaching the media, what it tells you is they're internally reflecting. And then when they move, it will be pragmatic and sensible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy with the summer recruitment, so I'm hoping that the same thing happens again. I mean, I think we did look at Semenyo, didn't we, at the start of last summer? Maybe that was just a rumour.
No, I mean, they're very interested in Semenyo. I just don't see them converting that position because he's obviously box office and doing incredible.
He's brilliant, isn't he?
And as we've revealed on TalkSport, there is a release clause there. Bournemouth are keeping the number under wraps. I'm told it's well in excess of £50 million, though. So there were some suggestions over the summer after he signed a new deal that several football clubs made offers in the region of 50 million and Bournemouth had a decision to make. That's not quite my understanding. The part about the offers, yes. The part about Bournemouth wondering if they should have cashed in, absolutely not. One, they had no intent to sell after he signed a new 5-year deal. And two, the number that they plan to sell for is, I'm told, and the release clause as well, well in excess of 50 million. And I don't see anybody, if they sign him, converting him outside of his current position.
One thing I would say is, look, Ahmad is proof that you kind of do need an attacking player in that position. But Ahmad is very, very special in terms of the way that he's built and the way that he reads the game, how good he is at going forward as well as positionally getting backwards. But I think, like you said, Semenyo's so good getting forward that you want to keep in that position, really.
He's succeeding on the right. I know he can play on the left centre forward. You could convert him to a left or a right-sided wing-back, but you've got to look at the attributes and the stats, and that's what you're buying. And similar to Bryan Mbeumo and Matheus Cunha, if Manchester United were to move for Semenyo, and I think a right-sided attacker could still be possible even after Mbeumo, simply because of Mbeumo's versatility. Then you think of Cunha as well. It's exactly the same. That's another new thing. When they're signing, they're not in a rigid position. So yes, if Manchester United moved for Semenyo, they would know that he has that versatility to play in lots of different areas, on the right, on the left, maybe a little bit deeper. But what we're seeing under Ruben Amorim is, even though that is true and it exists, he's not really like Thomas Frank or Ange Postecoglou as a manager who says, because of the versatility, I'm going to constantly rotate, I'm going to baffle opponents, players are going to switch left to right within 30-minute periods within matches. Ruben Amorim is a bit more defined. When he uses Cunha as a 9, he stays as a 9. And then when Benjamin Sesko plays, he goes back to being a 10. We've not seen much of Cunha starts, Cunha moves from 10 to left winger to number 9. That's what Postecoglou did at Spurs. That's what Frank does, because at Tottenham, he varies his formation, so it's not always the same. Amorim's system is more rigid. So if you sign a player, they may be versatile, but they'll have one predominant role. And again, were Semenyo to join Manchester United, I just don't see that predominant role being classified as a fullback instead of a winger or a wide forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would love him, but Cunha and Mbeumo do kind of give so much to your attack. There's other areas that need looking at, but such a good player. I mean, so many people in the comments are saying Nuno Mendes. I mean, I wish, guys. Don't think PSG are going to be letting him go anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm not expecting an exit in 2026 for Nuno Mendes.
I mean, I would love him, but I'd also love a Lamborghini tomorrow on the drive. You know what I mean? Anyway,
Hey, if Goldbridge is giving you a Christmas bonus, maybe
you can tell him, Ben. You can tell him. I would love that. I mean, speaking of Christmas, you plugged me right where I needed to be plugged, Ben. Well done. We have Christmas jumpers. Link in the description. They are selling fast, and they are really, really, really nice, guys. I'm so excited to get mine. Really good quality and perfect for the Christmas occasion. Halloween is tonight. Once we get through into November, the Christmas countdown begins. So make sure you get your Christmas jumper in the description. The link is there to go and shop it. Thank you very much. Next up, Ben, on the agenda, I want to ask you a little bit about... Right, okay. I'll ask you about Joshua Zirkzee in a second. First of all, I want to ask you about the loose links of Manchester United potentially testing West Ham's resolve for Lucas Paquetá. Is there anything in that? To me, he strikes me as a Ruben Amorim sort of player. I know we're stats in that area, but you know, he's got that bite, he's got that bit of aggression, really good on the ball. Good, very good player. I mean, is there anything in it?
Nothing major to get excited about yet, although what I would say is the player may agitate for a move. So as far as I'm aware, Paquetá is open to leaving West Ham. He did do that goal celebration.
What happened to this, Ben? What happened to this? Any celebration?
I mean, players do that, and maybe at the time that was a sign that he wasn't going anywhere during the summer, and he didn't. And of course, he was linked with Tottenham at that point, and maybe he didn't want that move. Spurs and West Ham don't do that much business, which is why there was an element of contention when Mohamed Kudus moved over the summer. So I think Paquetá at that point was genuinely grateful to West Ham United for the support during his FA case for alleged spot fixing charges, of which he was found innocent. But now you're looking at another new manager, a potential relegation battle. And as much as Paquetá kissed the badge and it was an iconic celebration, let's not forget, he felt he was days away from moving to Manchester City before these charges became public. And even the legal documents from the Independent Regulatory Commission confirm that a move to Manchester City was likely. So Paquetá had one foot out of the door at that point, and I don't think his head has really changed. He wants to go somewhere where he can play regular European football. I don't think Champions League football has to be instant. He's more in the mould of Cunha or Mbeumo rather than Liam Delap, because he's an established international. But he wants to join a project where in the long term he can go and play Champions League football. Manchester United links, I'm not aware yet of anything significantly developing. I think price may be a stumbling block as well. And even though Paquetá is not averse to a January exit, I still sense, because of the number that West Ham would be asking for, that summer would be more likely. So it might be one to watch. But obviously with Paquetá, he gets a lot of freedom at West Ham United. He takes the penalties, a lot of the free kicks. He can burst forwards. At Manchester United, you would think with Mount, Bruno Fernandes, Mbeumo and Cunha all wanting to play in the centre, all wanting freedom to burst forwards, he'd have to fulfil a slightly more rigid role. So if you isolate the profile, a good fit within the system, you're right. But if you look at the chemistry with the other players, I think Manchester United would have to work out how to keep Paquetá happy and still allow him freedom to go forwards if he was to join Manchester United. And at this stage, those close to Paquetá speak of the Manchester United links as only speculation, because they haven't had any formal contact from the club.
Yeah, I did see it and I thought, would suit the system, but we actually don't need him. So yeah, let's see how that develops. Well, speaking of West Ham, there was links to both Joshua Zirkzee and Mainoo to West Ham that they were potentially going to ask for them in January. I mean, first of all, what is the update around Joshua Zirkzee? Because all I hear is that he's seeking a move to get potential game time in the World Cup. But then also, I keep hearing that United aren't planning to let Mainoo and Joshua Zirkzee go. So what is the update?
Yeah, it's exactly that Mainoo will have to reassess. We don't actually have an indication yet as to whether he'll ask to go out on loan again, but we know he wants to play regularly with the World Cup in mind. So there is a realistic chance that Mainoo says the same thing as he said only a few months ago. My game time hasn't improved. I want to leave. Josh Zirkzee wasn't having those conversations over the summer, to my knowledge, because he looked at Benjamin Sesko arriving, but Rasmus Højlund departing, and still thought he'd get chances. But it's obvious that Benjamin Sesko is a 9 and ahead of Zirkzee, and Matheus Cunha can play there, and even Mbeumo can lead the line. So he has actually fallen down the pecking order, even though we haven't really seen much of Mbeumo as a 9. But it seems like if Sesko is out, Cunha's the 9, and then that obviously allows other players such as Mason Mount to come in the side at number 10. So Zirkzee's wondering where he's going to get opportunities. And it's not lost on the player, as far as I'm aware, speaking to sources close to him, that he hasn't really had a single opportunity that has been tactical for over 10 minutes, because the bulk of his exactly 90 minutes of action in 5 appearances this season came against Burnley when Cunha went off injured. Had Cunha not got injured, he probably would have only got 10 minutes in that game. Every other appearance for Josh Zirkzee this season for Manchester United has been 10 minutes or under. So you can say 5 appearances and no goals, but he really hasn't had that many minutes. And he is in a really difficult position because the Netherlands national team are absolutely stocked. And he was left out of Ronald Koeman's squad for the October qualifier wins over Malta and Finland. The Netherlands won both of those games as expected by 4-0. You look at AZ Alkmaar's 22-year-old forward Max Meerdink, who was preferred to Zirkzee. You got Emmanuel Emega, who's viewed as a top talent for the future and will join Chelsea from Strasbourg after the World Cup. Older players like Memphis Depay, Daniel Mallion at Villa, Justin Kluivert at Bournemouth, Cody Gakpo at Liverpool, Wout Weghorst, all of them can play in Zirkzee's position too. So he's going to struggle, I think, for World Cup selection unless he leaves. But he's in a similar boat to Kobbie Mainoo, that he doesn't just want to end his time at Manchester United. He wants to go play game time and then see where he's at after the World Cup. So we have to understand whether Ruben Amorim and Manchester United's recruitment and leadership team think that's a good idea. And it may be, if another striker doesn't come in January, whether experienced or young, that Zirkzee will end up having to fight for his place at Old Trafford, because Manchester United have got zero obligation to help the Netherlands side and Zirkzee ahead of the World Cup by sending him out. But if he is available, what I can tell you is that Roma are the leading candidate, and there is a strong, I would say, possibility that Evan Ferguson will be sent back from Roma to Brighton in January, and then Roma will move for Zirkzee. West Ham is a strong possibility, and they'll definitely add a striker in January, 100%. Nuno Espirito Santo has been really clear he wants a target man. And then you have PSV. I think Lille could come into the conversation depending on how their season is going. And if you go back to last summer, they really liked Zirkzee, but the ex-Rangers forward Hamza Igame joined recently and has done sensational. I think he scored 7 goals in 11 games this season. So as long as he keeps scoring, Lille's priority is not as high to find a striker as West Ham. So the long and short of it is that Zirkzee will not be short of loan options, but it all depends on Manchester United, and he is still valued as a squad player. With Kobbie Mainoo, West Ham also want a midfielder. Again, they would be open to a loan, and similar story. It all depends on Manchester United. If they can't bring in a midfielder in January, then I think it is pretty unlikely that they'll sanction a Kobbie Mainoo loan, meaning somebody has either got to try and buy Mainoo and put such a good offer on the table that Manchester United take the pure profit, and that's tough, because I don't think West Ham are going to be prepared to pay 50, 55, 60 million for Kobbie Mainoo. The number 40, 45 million that was touted over the summer was kind of hypothetical and relatively low, and it was born out of the fact that Mainoo wanted to leave. But nobody at Manchester United acknowledged that they would just cash in at that number. And as teams have more urgency mid-season, the price actually rises, even though a few more months have come off the contract, simply because the seller has all of the cards in a very quick January market. So I don't think West Ham would necessarily have the budget and the desire to buy Mainoo permanently. They're in a relegation battle, so Mainoo also probably wouldn't want to go there permanently either, knowing he might be a championship player potentially. So loan is probably the only option if West Ham and Mainoo gets more legs to it. And once again, it will be down to Manchester United as to whether they've changed their mind, because it was a very quick, very firm and very hard no when Mainoo went to Manchester United and said, send me out on loan. It was no chance. And he's therefore forced to try and get minutes within Manchester United. So this is going to be difficult, I think, for both players, but particularly Mainoo. And for Zirkzee, as I say, it may be 100% wage coverage and another striker would have to come in January before Manchester United entertained an exit.
Do you think AFCON will affect their opportunities of being able to leave, because you're going to have the likes of potentially, Ahmad, Mbeumo, Mazraoui, important players to Manchester United missing? Amrim's going to want the squad depth, right?
Yeah, and also if you're speaking to Zirkzee and he says, can I go out on loan? And then you've got AFCON, Manchester United are saying, you've got an opportunity. The only thing about AFCON is, as far as I'm aware, it starts mid-late December. So you're kind of going to have to prove to a player like Zirkzee before the January window opens that his minutes increase. And if you get to January the 1st or mid-January and that's not the case, then AFCON doesn't really benefit Zirkzee. So the proof will kind of be in the pudding, and we'll know whether Zirkzee gets more opportunities before the January window opens rather than during it.
Just a little bit I wanted to touch on before I ask you about Harry Maguire, Ben. There's been a little bit of noise around Etta Eyong. What's the story behind those links? I seen you put a little bit of something out on that earlier.
Yeah, we discussed Etta Eyong exclusively on the United stand a few weeks ago, and now it's getting a bit of media traction from Spain that Manchester United are one of the clubs tracking this young forward, and that's accurate. To my knowledge, he's got 6 goals in La Liga in 10 appearances, having joined Levante. And I think if you add up the goals and the goal contributions, at least up until mid-October anyway, only Kylian Mbappe had more goal contributions than Etta Eyong. And some people like to compare him to Haaland. I'm not strictly sure, if you do a full scouting report, that's accurate. He can go into sort of beast mode and he's very effective inside the box, but he actually has more versatility and gets more touches playing in La Liga than a player like Erling Haaland. But he's deft with his feet, he's good in the air, he's very physical, and he's certainly been prolific. So my understanding is that he is one of the young striker options for Manchester United if they go down that route. And there has been some initial contact between Manchester United and the player camp. At this stage, nothing more. And although a lot of people are kind of getting excited about a possible January move, and several outlets that I respect in Spain are saying that that might be possible, when I've made inquiries about the chance of a Levante exit, I'm not so sure that January is going to be the right time, because he only joined Levante on September the 1st. And that was on a 4-year deal, plus the fact that he's started to win caps for Cameroon now. So his expectation, if everything goes according to plan, will be he'll be off to the Africa Cup of Nations as well. So if you combine the fact he's not been at Levante for very long and he's hoping to go to AFCON, I don't think January will be the right time for the player to make a move. But in the summer, even though he'll only have been at Levante for a year, I do think we're going to hear a whole lot more about the possibility of Etta Eyong moving to a Premier League club.
Yeah, he seems really exciting. I remember speaking about him last time and then kind of seeing that news get a bit of buzz today. I was looking back into him, and he is an exciting player, and it kind of reignited in my mind. There's been very loose links to Manchester United looking at other strikers. I know Benjamin Sesko is very highly regarded. Same with Matheus Cunha, Brian Mbeumo. Zirkzee's light, but can't really get in the team at the moment. But it does feel like we're maybe looking at adding one more striker potentially. Yeah,
we'll also have to see how Chido Obi develops, because he was kind of ahead in terms of breaking into the first team due to injuries last season, and continues to do well at youth level for Manchester United. So it's all very well saying Etta Eyong, but maybe Chido Obi is going to be the one to break through in 2026. By November, he'll be 18. By next season, he'll almost be 19. So if you're talking about Man United need a young striker, Chido Obi is right there, and with a big reputation. But if, as expected, Rasmus Højlund ends up joining Napoli permanently and Josh Zirkzee departs, there's room for one more. I still sense they might go down the route of somebody more box office, more experienced. As I keep saying, nothing yet to get excited about regarding Harry Kane.
You brought it up, Ben. You brought it up.
Kane's just going to keep talking about Bayern and staying and not leaving in 2026, but there is a diminished release clause, and I think he'll more seriously look at his future. And if he thinks he wants to return to England to break that Alan Shearer Premier League record after the World Cup, and he's such a model professional that what are you going to expect other than Kane to be asked about his future and say, I'm not even thinking about it? But he has to, because one day I'm still told he'll end up back in the Premier League. It's just whether it's 2026, 2027 or beyond. But 2 seasons, whilst he can still get 20 plus goals, are going to be required if he's to stand any chance of breaking Alan Shearer's Premier League goal scoring record. Ivan Toney keeps being linked. I've made some inquiries on it. I'm not aware of any contact between any Premier League club and Ivan Toney yet. West Ham are probably the one that have made the most noise internally about Toney potentially being a target. And I think there it's just going to depend on Al Ahly, who have just brought in a new sporting director and doesn't want to lose Toney mid-season. And it's going to depend on Thomas Tuchel. Because if Tuchel directly calls up Toney, which he hasn't done to date, and says your only chance of making the World Cup squad is leaving Saudi Arabia, maybe Toney agitates for a move. But as of now, Toney's really happy in Saudi Arabia. Toney got an England call-up whilst he was playing for Al Ahly. He's part of a team that are the defending Asian Champions League champions and will feel they can be in the mix maybe for contending for the Saudi Pro League, and he's scoring goals over there. So everyone's sort of logically assuming that Toney will want out, Toney will want to move for the World Cup, but you actually have to think about Toney scoring goals, Toney settled with his family, and if Toney leaves in January, he's got a massive tax bill to pay as well. So it wouldn't remotely surprise me, despite links with several clubs, including Manchester United, if Toney actually ends up staying at Al Ahly in January, or even if he was to ask to leave, Al Ahly's new sporting director blocks that kind of exit. And as a consequence, even though I think it won't leave the media narrative between now and the end of the January window, it's a much harder battle to get somebody like Toney. But the reason I mention him, and also we spoke in terms of last summer about Mitrovic as well, is there will be opportunistic names that are a little bit older, that have got proven Premier League experience. And I think Manchester United, if they did anything mid-season, would be more inclined to go down that route rather than get a young, unproven player that if they move mid-season might not get any minutes anyway.
Yeah, I mean, let's see what happens. You brought up Harry Kane. I didn't this time. I'm gonna still get excited about it, and let's see what happens. I mean, I wanted to just ask you quickly about Harry Maguire before I move into some sort of quick fire questions to finish off the show. Anything on Harry Maguire's new contract?
Yeah, at the moment there's no formal offer, but initial talks are underway. They're kind of more informal at this stage. And for Maguire, he wants clarity on his future sooner rather than later. But it's actually Manchester United that are still deciding what they want to do. So if Manchester United put a reduced terms offer on the table to keep Harry Maguire for another year, my expectation is that Maguire will stay and sign it. But Manchester United is still debating what the right approach is and how low they want to go to actually keep Harry Maguire, because he's one of the better paid footballers at the club. So you might find that from Maguire's point of view, he starts to ask for more formal clarity before the January window opens, because then he can focus on his football and trying to get into the World Cup squad. But with Manchester United, they may be prepared to let it drag on a little bit, not to the point of David De Gea, where he's released and there's that little asterisk that says, but we're still talking and an extension offer is on the table. So I think you have a sort of timescale of ideal world for Maguire, sign a 1-year extension, get it done before the year is out, focus on his football, try and get into the World Cup squad. But I think Man United are actually prepared, if necessary, to let these talks drag on even beyond the January window, even knowing that Harry Maguire can then talk to other clubs and sign a pre-agreement. And that's just because, once again, they want to see how the season progresses. They want to see whether they're on course to get European football. Because scenario one is you lock Maguire down now, even on reduced terms. And then imagine if they repeat last season and they don't get any European football, you've got a whole less games. So then for somebody like Harry Maguire, you're still paying him good money and he's not going to play as much. Imagine if they think we're likely to get at least Conference League football and that results in a lot of rotation. You're happy to have a bigger squad and you definitely want a player like Harry Maguire because he might be playing alongside young players in the Conference League or the Europa League. He can mentor them. He can impact them. You've got enough games. The investment is worth it. And obviously, if they get Champions League football, you probably do want Maguire and you're prepared to pay him a little bit more. So it's a fascinating scenario kind of born out of the calamity of last season and the change of ownership, where when you're dealing with a player like Maguire, who obviously will still want to be well compensated because he can point to Anfield and his last minute winner and his influence on the football club off the field as well. So you have player probably thinking, I deserve a little bit more, but I want instant clarity. And if they give me that instant clarity, maybe I'll take a reduced wage because then I'm just settled. And you have Man United that are probably saying internally, we will make him a formal offer, but we might just wait until the midway point or 2/3 through the season, because then we'll know what we're likely to get as a minimum, as a worst case scenario. And if that's European games, you've got a little bit more budget and you've got a little bit more squad space. So this is why I think we have to be patient with the Maguire situation. But all parties have started those talks. And from Maguire's point of view, he's definitely willing to stay.
Be patient, everyone, on Harry Maguire's new contract. It's a debatable topic for me. On one hand, I'm like building a statue for that clutch goal. But on the other hand, I'm like, oh, I would like a young centre-back like a Mark Gay style to come in and be that replacement. I mean, with the way Liverpool's going, we could be in with a shot of getting Mark Gay at the end of the season.
Yeah. Real Madrid as well for Gay potentially. But honestly, I think that's the beauty of Maguire, that if they find the right terms, Maguire's not agitating post-World Cup to necessarily play every week. So the most underrated thing of Liverpool, dare I mention them on a Manchester United podcast, is they bring in the replacement before the replacement is needed, or even if the replacement is needed, when the person they're replacing is still there. Alisson's the number one when fit. Mamadashvili is there. Andy Robertson is still at the football club, and yet Milos Kirkos comes in. Conor Bradley is a young talent that's one option, but Jeremy Frimpong is signed. Mo Salah's still there, and for 2 years as it stands, but they'll probably bring in a right-sided player, Antoine Semenyo being one of their targets, but Salah might do the full 2 years. So that takes the pressure off the player that you bring in. And it means if that player doesn't hit the ground as fast as you would have hoped, you've still got that older head there. But maybe that older head knows that they're going to get diminished time. So I don't think Harry Maguire would have any issues playing less and less and less and less. And after the World Cup, it's not going to massively affect his international chances as well. So that's something to look out for. Right now, most of the questions asked are, what do Man United need and who's surplus to requirements that's going to depart? But over time, they'll hopefully get in a situation within their recruitment model where they need the older players. The fans want the older players and they're still getting output from the older players. And yet there's a really exciting younger player also fighting for competition. And you won't even notice the transition over time because they're both there and both competing for the same spot. And then naturally, of course, there'll be a parting of ways, by which point the younger player is on form, is liked and is established. And it's not quite as exciting as just buying someone that you go, we need them and we drop them in, but it's more sensible as a recruitment model because it shows that you don't have gaping holes in your squad, which has been a challenge for Manchester United in previous windows. Yeah,
I mean, there's something to be said for that, and I think you have kind of spotted an area where we have been weak in that area. I mean, I've seen some people on the show saying we never replaced Michael Carrick when he left, and I kind of can understand where they're coming from. So I think it's a good model to have that. But then also you look at the window where Liverpool went out and bought Gravenberch, McAllister and Szoboszlai, and then they just worked. So it's interesting how different
that was very
work.
On Liverpool as well, because for once they had a midfield gap, much like we've referenced with Man United, because they didn't get Moises Caicedo, they didn't get Romeo Lavia late in the window they were spending. So that was not the Liverpool way. But if you look at Van Dijk's still there, and they signed Giovanni Leone, who unfortunately is injured, but eventually will be a left-sided centre-back. If you look at Mo Salah, like I said before, that's what Liverpool like. Find the player, even if they're established and ready to go immediately, when the player they're ultimately going to replace week in, week out still has 2 years left on their contract. And if you do it that way, you build continuity, and then you don't have to chuck all these young players straight in at the deep end. And if they don't work, you get a whole lot of scrutiny, and that can affect the player, it can knock the player, and it can stifle their development. So the one I'm really interested in, because it is a Man U Liverpool, and I know Man United fans will celebrate the signing of Lenny Yoro because he didn't go to Real Madrid, he didn't go to Liverpool, but it's fascinating because the Man United pitch was, if you join us, you're playing every week, you're going to be an instant hit, you're going to be chucked straight in at the deep end. They did that, he got injured instantly, and he's still kind of growing into that role and that ability to start week in, week out. Liverpool said to Yoro, if we sign you, you're going to have to be patient for 2 years, not because we don't rate you and not because we're stifling you, but we think you need 2 full years of development in training and to be eased in. And that's what's going to make you the generational talent. Man United's approach was more chuck him in at the deep end and see what happens. And I actually think that has set him back a little bit. So what's going to happen is in the next 6 months or year and a half, Yoro, if he can stay fit, will suddenly become that generational talent, but it's taken him a little bit more time. So Man United won the race by playing a bit to the sort of player's ego of you'll be far more regular than at Anfield. But I actually think Liverpool's pitch for his development might have been the more sensible one.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a side of it where Van Dijk and Konate, when they were at that level, it's always going to be hard to come in, isn't it? And when United centre-backs, maybe they weren't at that levels, but it's interesting, and I think you make a really, really good point. And everyone get your comments in, let me know what you think. Smash a like on the video if you've not already. Thank you everybody for watching. Going to come to the super chats to finish off with, but remember, before we come to your super chats now, because there's some good ones in there tonight, Bundesliga on That's Football, Augsburg versus Dortmund. The stream starts at 7:15 live. Match footage, you're watching the game live on That's Football with Goldbridge commentating alongside you. And then Saturday, Manchester United versus Forest. We're going to get Ben's prediction in a second because he keeps getting it right. Countdown to kick off at 1 p.m. and watch along starts at 2:30 p.m. Make sure you're there. On That's Football after that, you have after United, it's Spurs versus Chelsea, and then Liverpool versus Villa, all on Saturday evening. So on the United stand, you've got United versus Forest, and then that evening you've got Spurs versus Chelsea and Liverpool versus Villa. It's a cracker Saturday. And on Sunday, Super Sunday, it continues with City versus Bournemouth. That is a big one. Brilliant Super Sunday. Bournemouth are just smashing it. Can't wait for all that football, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But lastly, Ben, you have MK asking what left-sided centre-backs are we looking at, if any. We mentioned the left-sided centre-back situation. Have you got anything to say on that, Ben?
Yeah, I think we sort of touched on it a little bit, and what I've reported before is that were they to sign a left-sided fullback, it might be left-sided centre-back who can also play fullback. So you might find it's more of a player in that Calafiori mould that can be centre-back, or alternatively move and be fullback. I'm not aware yet of any new or young defensive targets. Manchester United are still sort of determining what direction they're going to go in. And I wouldn't even view it as left-sided only, because your kind of modern centre-back now can be right-sided or left-sided centre-back. And Ruben Amorim is on record repeatedly, if you look at his Sporting time, as saying he'll play 2 left-sided centre-backs or 2 right-sided centre-backs together. So Jared Branthwaite is obviously one of the names that we know Manchester United have liked for quite some time, but he's happy at Everton. They don't want to sell. I don't think there's any guarantee whatsoever, because of his contractual situation, that he's going to change clubs in 2026. Mark Gay, you've mentioned before, is opportunistic. He's a free agent. I think Manchester United would be remiss not to look at a player like that. But I still think Real Madrid and Liverpool are ahead of Manchester United in terms of their advancement and their desire to actually make a pitch to the player. But let's see what happens in January, because he can start speaking to clubs. And one thing we know about Jim Ratcliffe is that, a bit like the Chelsea model he admires, he wants to disrupt and he wants to be involved in all of these conversations. Everyone said that it was always going to be Real Madrid for Yoro and then Liverpool for Euro, and out of nowhere, Manchester United came in. So you can never say never with Gay, but it's not like they've approached the player side yet. So they're assessing at the moment, but I do expect a left-sided centre-back to come in 2026. I don't think it will be January, but almost certainly that's the position that they are further looking to strengthening come summer.
Desiree Labonte says Stiller in January, I mean, I wish. Then Anderson, Wharton or Baleba / Inacio, and a left wing back for Casemiro, Darwin Martinez next season would be perfect. Get you on the recruitment team. JB Sahar says, any update of change of owners or protests? That's the last one in there.
So on the midfield front, yes, Elliot Anderson, they've looked at him. He's doing well. He's not going anywhere mid-season. It's not as advanced, I'm told, as some reports have suggested in terms of the talks. They just appreciate the player, but he's very happy at Nottingham Forest and still a mid-season, as we said at the beginning of the show. Very, very unlikely unless you massively overpay. And we have to wait and see whether Stuttgart buy out that release clause, and then they've got all the control over the price. Not a bad thing, by the way, if they do that, because sometimes there's a trade-off where the club will say to the player, we're buying out your release clause, but we'll still let you go at fair market valuation. So actually the player knows in having his release clause bought out that Stuttgart won't unduly stand in his way. So that could be one to watch. And by the way, the other centre-back that's just worth noting is Ousmane Diomande, who I think we may hear more on Manchester United and their interest, because of course he played under Ruben Amorim at Sporting, and every other window it's been pointing to this release clause, which I think is a minimum of 80 million euros. It may even be as high as 100 million euros. And any club that's tried to do a deal, even Crystal Palace, when they got quite far, they weren't able to agree a fee with Sporting. But next summer, I think there is a concrete possibility that the 21-year-old, who will be 22 obviously by then, is available on the market and for a lower price. So that one might also be one to watch. Regarding protests and ownership and everything like that, I'm not aware of anything bubbling at the moment of note. Some, of course, are keeping an eye on whether this UAE consortium materialises. The Glazers are still happy to let Jim Ratcliffe run the Sporting side. If Manchester United go on a winning streak, I think most fans will be quite happy with what they've done on the field. And I think that the summer window will pay dividends. I don't think there's that much from fans I speak to, anger or frustration about the Sporting setup. Maybe more so when Dan Ashworth left, but now I think a lot of people are very happy with the combination of Christopher Vell and Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada, and obviously Jim Ratcliffe when he inputs as well. So the next steps really from ownership are, first and foremost, are the Glazers going to declare anything? And is this UAE consortium going to come forwards? And it wouldn't surprise me if everything goes quiet on that front. Then second of all, can they turn the conceptual design into an actual design and get this new stadium project off the ground? And the short answer to that is yes. They've sort of taken the circus tentpole design out of it, and that is born out of consultation. So one key word in what I've said is conceptual. These designs are not final, they're still being finessed. And that will take time, which is why we're not getting that many stadium updates. Suggestions, I'm told, that the architecture firm behind the Man United designs are more focused on getting the new San Siro project off the ground are wide of the mark, because there's plenty of people that can actually do the designs. And then once the stakeholders have been spoken to, it's about finding construction partners to turn it from an on-paper drawing effectively to reality. And the San Siro project is going to have nothing to do with that. There's no suggestion that Man United are going to be using the same building firms or other people that you need to get this new stadium off the ground as the San Siros. They're going to have to wait for that to somehow be built. So everything is on track. But as with any new stadium, when you launch the conceptual designs, you start to think it's close. Then you've got to speak to the stakeholders. You've got to fund it. You've got to get planning permission. You've got to get fan buy-in. That takes time. Then when they break the ground, we'll find out whether it can be done as early as 2030. And what I would say on that front is that even though people have said in the past that Jim Ratcliffe is bullish about getting it done. So it is 2030, 2031 that's the aim. Many within the industry and within stadium construction felt when he said that in public that that was ambitious. So it might be 2031, 2032, or even 2032, 2033. And if it opened in 2020, 2032 or 2033, that's not slow, that's not delayed. 5 to 7 years to get a stadium from the very early conceptual designs to reality, especially of this magnitude, and to fund it at a 2 billion cost. All of that takes time. And if they got it done in 7 years from the conceptual plans to the opening, that would also be very fast as well. So that seems on track as well. And then, of course, these general protests against the Glazers will likely continue. But it's fascinating now. And obviously fans will have a far better perspective than me. But I sort of struggle to align the fact that those saying Glazers out now realise, because of the drag-on clause, that it's Ratcliffe out as well if it's 100% of the club. So those that quite like where the Ratcliffe project is heading, and its very early stages, if they want the Glazers out, it might result in a whole new sporting strategy and a whole new sporting department and a whole new sporting everything, because the drag-on clause would allow the Glazers to pull out Sir Jim Ratcliffe with him. And that, for me, clouds it, because by pushing too hard for the Glazers out, it might result in Ratcliffe out, and it might result in the project having to restart over again. And that might actually, even if it's an exciting new owner with lots of money, set the project back. And this is where the Glazers are quite smart, because they've aligned themselves to Ratcliffe. They've let him be the scapegoat. They've let him run the sporting department. They've let him do all the work. If it goes well, they're a part of that. And then Glazers out feels a little bit uncomfortable, because it's also Ratcliffe out if it's the drag-on clause in that specific scenario. And if it's not going well, then you can say Glazers out, but Jim Ratcliffe is going to get a lot of the criticism. And many in the industry think the Glazers got a really good deal optically, financially, and logistically, because they can essentially have their cake and eat it.
We'll have to wait and see what happens, and if the results keep going in a positive way. I mean,
by the way, that was not quick fire. I apologise.
It's okay, no worries, Ben. We like the insight. We like the insight. We never do quick fire, let's be real. But thank you very much for all of your insight. It's been brilliant once again, as it usually is. Ben Jacobs has been fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for all of your comments. Smash a like on the video if you've not already. Let's see if these results can continue. It's 3 in a row now. Can it be 4 in a row? Very quickly, Ben, will it be 4 in a row for United against Forest?
Yeah, I can't see them losing at Nottingham Forest. Forest conceding goals for fun, Manchester United scoring goals. And I think this will be an occasion where Sané Lamens gets a clean sheet. My prediction is Forest 0, Manchester United 4. 4.
Wow. Right. Okay. Let's hope so, because you've been getting these pretty close each time, and you've definitely been getting the wins right. So
it's not at all warped by the fact that I added Mbeumo and Cunha to my fantasy team.
Oh, that's even better. And Mbeumo's been in since day one for me. Stuck with him, and he's repaying me nicely. But everyone, smash a like on the video if you've not already. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Bit of a different timing for us. It's been 2 p.m. Friday with Ben Jacobs. You've got Bundesliga to look forward to later. Have a lovely Friday evening, everyone. Have a lovely Halloween night, and we will see you on the next one.